What's up, guys? Welcome to this episode of the review show where I'm talking all about TV shows. Starting with Killing Eve Season 1 and Season 2. So Killing Eve is based on the book series called Villanelle, I believe. All about how there's this kind of like an MI5, MI6 kind of agent called Eve who's investigating this hitman assassin character called Villanelle. And it takes off from there. The first season's all about trying to track down Villanelle and stop her from doing what she's doing. There's also like this behind the scenes kind of thing of this like conspiracy group who's a little vague. That stuff I feel like is building up, and that's going to be something that's bigger as the series progresses. But the first season, very fun. Phoebe Waller-Bridge is the main writer of the first season, and you could tell, particularly in the first few episodes, when there is a surprising amount of comedy in there. It should be expected from Phoebe Waller-Bridge. She's hilarious. But the first season is very much a drama with comedy bits in there. It gets more serious as it progresses, and you can tell which episodes are written by Phoebe Waller-Bridge and which ones aren't, because the Phoebe Waller-Bridge ones, usually the more funny ones. But the characters, she does a good job in the very first episode of establishing who the characters are, giving them unique personalities and quirks, making them very believable. The fact that Villanelle, the main villain, but also kind of the main character as well, is really fascinating. She's played by Jodie Comer, a brilliant performance. I believe she just won an Emmy Award for, I think it was season 2 she won an Emmy Award for, but totally understandable. And she gives this character who should be, at the time, so threatening and intimidating and scary, despite the fact that she is like a fairly normal looking woman who... She gives so much personality. She's got like a childlike charm to her. The fact that she has had this different upbringing and now she's like quirky, often coming out with these one-liners and jokes. She's got a sense of humor to her. But she's also looking for like a deeper purpose in life, I think. She doesn't want to be a killer, it doesn't seem. Then Eve, how she's so determined at first to try and track this person down. Where this storyline ends up going, I'm not entirely satisfied with in Season 2. There are some surprises, particularly towards the end of Season 1. The performances are brilliant across the board. It does feel like it's a spy show on a budget, though. Yes, it's filmed in a bunch of different locations, but you can tell when certain locations aren't actually where they're saying it is. So there's certain instances where they go to like Italy or something, it's like, right, that's not really Italy, is it? But Season 2, it does something with the relationship between Eve and Villanelle, which I'm not that big a fan of. It felt like they were forcing it on us rather than it feeling natural. But I am still invested in the show. I am still interested in where it's going to go. It just means that the storyline in Season 1 is just for Season 1, where they are trying to track down Villanelle and stop Villanelle. Then it changes in Season 2, where it becomes something else. And I'm wondering where it's going to go from here on out, because it can't just keep repeating itself. But yeah, overall, a good show. I don't think it's as good as some people are making it out to be. I think budget limitations are affecting how good it can be. At the end of the day, the characters are so good, the characters are so likable, and they're so well acted that I think that makes up for most of it. And even though Phoebe Waller-Bridge isn't involved in the second season is still pretty funny as well. Will that continue into the third season, because they are getting a new showrunner every season? That remains to be seen. The Kominsky Method, Season 2. This is a Chuck Lorre show on Netflix. Michael Douglas, Alan Alda. It's surprisingly good. Yeah, it's not the greatest thing ever. It's not the most original thing ever. Michael Douglas is running a school for acting, basically. And Alan Alda just had his wife die in the last season. Is now trying to move on with his life, basically finding a new purpose in his life. This season is overall good, but there are some questionable things in there. Some things that I'm like, right, Michael Douglas knows better. Because without going, I'm just going to say it. This season, Michael Douglas's character gets cancer. And Michael Douglas in real life has had cancer. He probably knows what it's like to go through this, and yet the show, because I've had cancer twice, I know what it's like to have cancer. The show doesn't do a good job at showing that. And it's understandable. It's not what the show wants to do. But it's a certain plot point that for some reason just feels completely forced in. It's like 1 minute, right, he's perfectly fine for a bunch of episodes. Wow, he's got cancer. Let's give that to him for the rest of this season. And it didn't sit well with me, the depiction of it. It felt forced, but overall it works, kind of. It just felt like they could have built up to it a bit more, really. And because Michael Douglas is head cancer, I think he should have probably had a bit more input into it and say, like, actually, it's a bit more like this and this. But, yeah. It just comes out of nowhere. That's the problem, basically. But it's very funny at times. This season is more dramatic because of the cancer stuff, because it does get into more, like, health and what you're going to do in the future when you're getting too old to do certain things. And that's one of the things that I really praise the show for, is that Michael Douglas, Alan Adler, they are on the older side of things, and it really delves into, like, right, two grown elderly men who are essentially on their own. How are they going to cope with being on their own in their later years? They've kind of got to rely on other people, and it does a good job of highlighting the importance of relationships and, like, legacy even, like what you're going to leave behind. And in so many ways, Michael Douglas's character, his legacy is his acting school, it is his students. But I feel like when you've got another show like Barry going on, where there's also an acting school in there and they highlight the importance of students, Barry does a much better job at showing that stuff. What's happening in Barry should be happening with, like, the Henry Winkler character and his students, should also be happening in this show, and it just kind of isn't. A lot of the acting school stuff is just like, right, let's get these characters in there to do a bit of comedy and to have, like, a few jokes here and there to give them something to do. It doesn't feel like it's all that important. So that's probably the biggest negative I have about this season, is that what they actually do for a living doesn't feel like it's important at all to them, when it should be. But overall, a good season, I would say. There's just a few questionable story elements, and it is more dramatic, I would say, as the season progresses. But at times it's very funny as well. The end of the Effing World Season 2. So the end of the Effing World Season 1, I thought was brilliant. Really, really good. This has been like 2 years since that, though. Did we need this? No. That's the biggest problem with this season, is that it's completely unnecessary. Felt like they'd wrapped up the story. We could assume what happened afterwards, and guess what? Chances are what you assumed happened after the end of the Effing World Season 1, that's what happened, basically. Now this season, 2 years later, they've kind of moved on with their lives a bit. Jessica Barden, who is one of the main characters in Season 1, is very much the main character this season. So much in Season 1 was from the main guy's point of view, whereas this season's from her point of view. You've got a new character showing up now in Naomi Aki. Brilliant performance from her. Really weird, really odd. There's clearly some sort of, like, mental illness or, like, depression, social anxiety stuff, autism stuff going on there, which the film never really delves into too much, which I think is the series never delves into too much, which I think is a little disappointing, because there's clearly something on there. It could have explained things a bit more. But overall, this is a good season. Not as good as Season 1, but that's a pretty tough thing to follow up on. I don't think we're going to get a Season 3. I think this show does a good job of bringing the main characters back, giving them a new purpose, establishing, right, this stuff happened, how do we move on from this, what do we do now, and what's next in our lives. And I think it does a good job of bringing these characters together and giving them a bit of closure. This feels very much like an epilogue to Season 1. And if you like Season 1, I do recommend it. It's not as good, like I said. It's still very funny, though. One of the big disappointments of this season, though, is that I remember watching Season 1 and being absolutely shocked by some of the stuff that was going on. There's pretty much nothing like that in this season. There's one moment, but then they quickly take it back, and it's more like, right, you just done that to surprise us, and now you've took it back because that's not really what you want to do. But yeah, this season lacks the surprise elements, it lacks the shock elements, and that's a bit disappointing. But overall, really good, I do recommend it. Just a bit unnecessary as well. The Crown Season 3. Brilliant. Really good show. One of the best shows this year. You've got the new cast members taking over. Olivia Colman, Tobias Menzies, Helena Bonham Carter, and Ben Chaplin, I think he's called. They do a very good job of just seamlessly taking over these roles. And that's impressive because the roles were made so iconic by the original cast in the first 2 seasons. Olivia Colman and Tobias Menzies in particular are like, right, these just are their characters. They've clearly looked at Claire Foy's performances as well as, like, the Queen's and so on, and it it feels very natural the way that one actor's just taken over. It feels and looks like they haven't actually changed actors at times. It helps, of course, that you've still got everyone behind the scenes working on it. You've still got Peter Morgan writing it and so on. But this is The Crown. If you've liked The Crown in the first 2 seasons, it's very much just more of that, which isn't necessarily a good or bad thing. There's some really good stuff going in here. One of the big criticisms, one of the only criticisms I would say, is that at times I do feel like it's rushing through history a little bit. So there are big time jumps between episodes, it seems. So, for example, one episode, you've got the Prime Minister. Next episode, it's a different Prime Minister. They just brush over and say, right, yeah, hi, I'm the new Prime Minister. It's like, right, couldn't we have seen that? And then in the next episode, guess what? The original Prime Minister is back, because that's what happened in real life. But yeah, the way in which it jumps through history is a bit jarring, but they do seem to be picking up the key events and moments in the Queen's life, it seems. So that's good. One of the things also that was a little disappointing was Helena Bonham Carter. In my opinion, one of the best actors on the planet. I feel like she's underutilized this season. There's only really 2 or 3 episodes where she's like the main focus. And so much of the season she's just either not in or she's just kind of there sitting in the background doing stuff. It feels like they haven't really got much for her to do. And an actor is such a big name, such a renown, why haven't you given her more to do? And yeah, the 2 or 3 episodes where she is the main focus, she's brilliant in. I also think Tobias Menzies is amazing as, what's his name? I can't remember any of the Royal Family members' names, sadly. But the replacement of Matt Smith, Prince, yeah, whatever. He's great. I think this is probably one of his best performances next to his performance in Outlander, which was criminally underrated. But yeah, the big thing about this season is that the writing's so good. It's an almost perfect season of TV, I would say. It is more of The Crown, so there's not much more I can say about that. It runs through history pretty well. I can't talk about how accurate it is or anything like that, but it's a very enjoyable, very great cast, like brilliant casting across the board. Sometimes I do think they are a little underutilized at times. The focus is so much on Olivia Colman and Tobias Menzies, so that the supporting characters don't always get the moments to shine, or they don't get as many moments to shine. But yeah, go watch this. It's a great show. Very insightful, I would say, but again, how accurate is it? Final show I'm talking about today is The Man in the High Castle Season 4, the final season. And wow, this is not good. Man in the High Castle, I think, is always skirted the line between being okay and being bad. And that's because of how slow-paced it is and how deliberately dragging things out it is. Clearly this season was not meant to be the final season, but they brought things to an end anyway. There's a big time jump between season 3 and this season, and they've done one of the worst things I think a TV show can do, in that time jump they kill off a main character. Why would you do that? One of the best characters in the show is simply gone when this season happens, and it's odd, it's bizarre. There's also the fact that the character is called Juliana. She doesn't have much to do in this season until like the latter half. It's very much in the first half of the season, she's just living out a new life in this new parallel world. Then she kind of comes back for whatever reason, which is never fully explained. But yeah, it just feels like this show was constantly building up to something that just never happened. It was constantly building up and hyping up that, right, there's going to be a resistance, there's going to be fighting back against the Nazi regime. Then all of that's happened between seasons. But this season, they introduced new characters because at the end of the last season, they killed off a bunch of their main characters. Rightfully so, those characters didn't need to be in the show anymore. But this season, the new characters aren't that interesting. They seem to have come out of nowhere as well. There's this whole movement of African American individuals who are fighting back. It's all really interesting stuff, just not done very well at all, because we don't get enough time to see these characters. The characters aren't likable or anything really. It does do a good job of giving every character some sort of closure, but then this actual series itself ends on a cliffhanger as well, which it's one of those cliffhangers which is meant to make you like intrigued and leave you wondering, like in awe, kind of like, oh, what's that about? A bit like Lost almost, like, right, what the hell happened in Lost? But this one, it just doesn't work at all. But there is enough closure here, I would say, for the characters. It's just they tried to go a little further with the whole like parallel world stuff. But yeah, really disappointing season of TV. And I think this season has actually ruined the entire show overall, because so much of it was like giving it credit for being a build up to something, because not something never happened, because they kind of just overlooked it. It's kind of ruined it. There's no need to go back and watch any of that again. It just turns out it is just a slow, boring show now, and it wasn't building up to anything. So that's really disappointing. But the acting was good. Rufus Sewell, who's like the main villain of the season and of the whole show, as it turns out now, he's great in this show. But again, he's a Nazi, and one of the big problems that the show's had, one of the most uncomfortable things the show's had, that he's the best thing in this show, he's the most relatable thing in this show, but at the same time, he's a Nazi. And this season, they kind of lose some of that a bit, because they do have to make him the main villain now. And it works really well, he becomes the main villain really well, but everything going on around him is just boring. And yeah, really disappointing. This show had so much potential. The actual idea of the show on paper is brilliant. It just hasn't been executed very well at all. And I think so much of it's to do with time and budget limitations as well, rather than a lack of desire to do it. So that's what's really disappointing, I think. But that's all I'm talking about today. Those are the shows that I've watched recently. Some I liked, some I didn't. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Subscribe to my channel if you really like this. The more subscribers I get, the more content like this I can make. Go over to Twitter and Instagram as well. Follow me at _Grant_Burton, where I post comments and stuff like that all the time. Until next time though, thanks for watching.